But with crack, you're constantly chasing that buzz all the time. And I got to the obvious low point where I was robbing my mum's house. I was robbing money out of her bank account. She was born 6 weeks early with a crack addiction, a methadone addiction, and whatever else you can imagine. So I was born in a little village just outside Bath in the southwest of England, and I loved it there. It was really good fun. Very small little place, very close little knit of friends, and it was great to hang out and just be outdoors. It was definitely my thing. Most of my family worked on farms, and so naturally I just ended up going and helping and going that way too. And it was so much fun. Hard work and graft, it didn't really matter, because when you're having fun like that, it just doesn't feel like it's work anymore. When I was about 5 or 6, we moved to Bath itself, and I started trying to find a different friendship group, hanging out with different people. It didn't have the same feel. It wasn't that home sort of feeling that, I had in the little village. And so I tried to always get back there as much as possible and spend as much time as I could with my nan and granddad. But, onwards we went, and school happened in Bath, and it wasn't great. I didn't enjoy it. School wasn't my thing. I definitely spent more time out of it than in it. I was an absolute pro, intercepting letters, intercepting phone calls, trying to find out where I was, and just pretending to be my dad, and just saying that I was ill, the usual sort of stuff. And it was good. There was a small group of us that just were not interested in school. In fact, pretty much every school day, what we tried to do is either get hold of some alcohol, try and find somewhere that'll serve you, and there's always a shop somewhere that'll serve you, or try and get some money for something else. And we just pottered through. And this went on for pretty much when I was 13 onwards. And we barely hit school. We barely hit anything. I left with no sort of educational passes in any way, shape or form. And so decided I wanted to get into college and go to become a mechanic. And we were still drinking. We were still smoking hash and weed and things. So as you can imagine, it didn't go well, really. I mean, we got in. I managed to get a placement. I didn't really focus when I was there. I ended up getting dirty, and I really didn't like getting dirty. Not that sort of dirty anyway. And so it didn't really last long. I think I lasted about 8 months. And but during that time, they found me a work placement, because it was a work and study sort of gig. And so I was cleaning cars at this little garage outside Bristol. And it was good. It was good to be around other men just doing car stuff. And it felt like, like I was part of almost like a family, if not a very dysfunctional one. And I had a really, really busy Saturday one day. It was immensely busy, and all the salesmen were busy. And someone asked me about some details for one of the cars. And so I spoke to him about it and ended up selling it. And that day I sold 5 cars. And when I told the boss at the end of the shift and gave him like the paperwork and said, I've done these, I've got deposits on them, and here's the paperwork all signed and that, because I watched it happen so many times. He said to me, on Monday, you come back in smartly dressed. You're no longer washing cars. You're now a salesman. Which was great, because I started making some serious money. Commission on cars, especially the second-hand market, cars fly out everywhere. And while this was amazing for my pocket, this was very, very bad for me as a person. I was still, as I say, using alcohol and drugs and smoking weed and hash and stuff with a core group of friends, but now I had serious money. And so I was buying more, and I was splashing it, and I was, trying to be the boy in all of that. Yeah, look at me, I'm the man. I'm doing this. I was buying and selling my own cars even. And it was going very, very well. But there was also a very big downward trajectory that I hadn't really realized I was on or seen coming. One of my friends at the time started coming along with some other drug, and he was saying it was hash oil, and it wasn't. It was heroin, and we were smoking it every day, and I was buying it every day, and it didn't really matter. I had money, and slowly but surely, as you can imagine, there was an addiction formed. But I didn't really know it. So you don't know you got an addiction until you're without the thing you're addicted to. So if you're making money and you're buying it every day, you don't know that you're flat out. And it wasn't until, probably about a year doing it every day that I started to meet dealers for myself and started to cut out the middleman, so to speak, and being able to score for myself, that I realized that the hold this drug had on me. But I also didn't care because I could just buy it. So what does it matter? But now I can buy it as and when I want without having to worry about waiting for a mate to finish his work to go get it for me. It became very, very dangerous. And it didn't take long until I ended up losing my job because I didn't go in, or I had a bad attitude or stuff. And once I lost that job, obviously I lost my income. And that then made me realize how addicted I was and how sick I would get if I didn't have it. So I had to get other jobs, but they went down the pay grade. So, from a care home to a cleaner to, just really dead end jobs to KP at one point. But obviously they all ended the same way. I was using drugs. I was in no fit state to be doing any of these jobs. So ultimately I kept losing job after job after job after job. And I met my now wife at the time during that spiraling time. And we both ended up with horrendous heroin addiction. And it was tough, man. It was tough. And my mum got to the point where she was broken and she didn't want no more of this. And so we had to leave. And rightfully so. And so we ended up on the streets, homeless, and no job, no income. And there's only one place to go from there, and that's doing crime. And so my first crime was actually an armed robbery. But I was really, really poor at it. Like, I was terrible at crime. It was not my strength. The shop I robbed was a little newsagent's, and I stood in line in the queue, waiting to be served, and then robbed it. That's the level of my skill that I had in the criminal world. Safe to say I didn't last long before I got picked up, and I got a 3-year prison sentence for that, which was the beginning of many. And in and out of prison for the next, I don't know how many years, probably 6-7 years. I was only out for a couple of months. But after that first sentence and coming out, Bath always had issues with drugs. It still does to this day. Every city does. And it was always just heroin and maybe some speed and things like that. But crack cocaine had landed, and it would change everything. People were now literally destroying people. Friends that were like, while they still had heroin habits, would help each other out on their paydays. That's gone. People are ruthless now. And it really didn't take me long to get into that circle and using that drug. And it stole everything. I'd never been part of something that had just taken so much in such a short amount of time. Now, with heroin, you can take some heroin and then you're not going to be sick no more. You're not really going to get high. You're just going to chill out and gouge out, and that's about it. But with crack, you're constantly chasing that buzz all the time, and you will do anything to get that buzz. And sure enough, it didn't take long for me to fall into the most spiral of nightmares. And I got to the obvious low point where I was robbing my mum's house. I was robbing money out of her bank account. I was robbing my nan. I was robbing my granddad. The two people that possibly held me the most and loved me the most in my life. And I didn't have any remorse at the time. I just did what I felt I had to do to feed a habit. And so those were the moments, now I look back, that I realized how low I got, how down the bottom of the corridor, how just out and out, there was no limit that I wouldn't go past. There was no line that I wouldn't cross. I was in prison again and again and again, coming out, lasting a week, maybe less, and then in again. And it just kept happening and happening. And the whole of that time, my partner was still holding on. They'd housed her, but she was going through her own hell while still somehow writing to me and, supporting me and allowing me to move back in with her when I come out. So we were fighting a losing battle. And when I come out of my last short sentence, my partner was pregnant, and our first child was born. She's now 20. And she was born 6 weeks early with a crack addiction, a methadone addiction, and whatever else you can imagine. And it was horrible. And I can remember being at the hospital. My partner went into an emergency situation. So the umbilical cord had wrapped around the baby's neck, and she got rushed in for an emergency C-section. And I don't like hospitals. I don't like blood. I don't do any of that stuff. It terrifies me. But I got dragged in to stand next to her and hold her hand like I was actually like achieving anything or doing anything. And this doctor proceeded to cut her open in the most speedy fashion you've ever seen. Like, it was scary to watch. And they plucked this little blue baby out, and she was tiny. And then they rushed her over to this little cubicle piece, held her in there, and there was no tears, there was no crying, there was no nothing. It was just silence and people talking and working and being a bit frantic. My partner's looking up to me, hoping for me to give her some info, but I don't know. I got nothing to say. I got nothing to do. I don't know what's going on. But then there's some tears. You hear a baby crying. And I saw the relief in my partner's face. So obviously this is a good thing. And they take her off to the recoup room. I get taken to a different room. And then about a minute or two later, the baby comes through. And they got her wrapped up with a little hat on, and they put her in my arms, and they say, "Oh, can you feed her this tiny little SMA bottle, little glass bottle with a tiny teat on it?" And I'm holding her, thinking this little bottle, which is really, really small, is bigger than her head. And I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done this before. This lovely lady sat next to me, just watching me, making sure I'm okay. And I realized at that point, I don't want to be apart from this child, ever. I never want to be apart from her. It clicked something in me that I didn't know was there. Now, it's not that it fixed me and healed me and sent me in some miraculous way of never doing anything wrong again, because it did not. But what it did, it made a move in my heart that I didn't know could move. It ignited my heart again that I didn't know had any life left in it. And I didn't go back to prison. And it wasn't because I got better at crime. It was actually worse than that. It's because we started being entitled to other benefits. And because of that, it meant that we could spend money on drugs and not have to go out and commit crime. So the benefits that my child was entitled to and should have been having, we were just smoking and injecting. And so this went on for a while. And my partner fell pregnant with our second child. And again, same system, same thing. We were hooked up with multiple agencies. We were seeing a different agency, whether it's a drug agency, social services, or a housing organization, whatever it might be, every day of the week, sometimes twice. And we were attending stay and play groups, which was part of our agreement. And it was just hectic. And all these groups, all these agencies were all talking about us all the time, all doing the game of Chinese whispers, and half the time not actually conveying what we had said in the first place, because things get slightly twisted and changed. But we persevered on. And these two kids, and a little bit later, my boy was born, had possibly the worst upbringing. It would never have been allowed in today. It just wouldn't have been. And somehow we managed to hold on to them and keep them until they got into school. And my eldest, 5 years old, went into our local infant school and excelled. It just suited her. And I think it's because it was a safe place for her. It was safer than home. And I think she felt that. And it was from there that she come home one Friday with an invitation to go to her breakfast on a Sunday morning. And she was so happy when she come through the door that she'd been given this invitation. And she said, Dad, I want to go. And I was like, okay. So we looked at the invite, and sure enough, it says words on it like church, God, you're welcome, come along. And I straight away did not want any part of that. And so I told her no. She then did what every child must do in those situations and went to my partner and tried negotiating with her, to which she said, go see your dad. And this proceeded all weekend until Sunday morning. The genius plan was formed that we would take her down to the shop next door to the school, buy her a chocolate bar, and she'd be forgotten. The invite wouldn't matter anymore because, you know, she'd have this chocolate bar or a magazine and she'd be happy. And so we had to walk past the school to get there. And then as we were going past, I got my boy in the pram, my eldest on one side of the pram, the other daughter on the other side of the pram. My partner's pushing. And they turned into the school gate. My 5-year-old, who, like I said, now 20, turned everyone, and we all followed. And we walked into church. And none of us wanted to be there. None of us wanted to go, but we went in. And as we walked through the first set of doors, and if any of you have been to a school, you will notice door after door after door. The first set of doors, we were welcomed by this lovely couple. And now when I look back, I realize we were welcomed. Like, for years, we've been hooked up for agencies, as I said, going to different appointments, meeting at different places, all the agencies talking to each other about us. But at no point ever were we welcomed. We got a hello, but mostly we were a tick box to make sure we'd gone to our appointment. But this was different. We walked through those doors, and this lovely couple looked us straight in the eye and said, hi, welcome, how are you? I'd never had that. I'd never been welcomed like that. They almost sort of walked us through the next set of doors, took us into the school hall, and there was quite the most spectacular buffet breakfast I'd seen in quite a long time. And so the morning looked up, and we thought, well, we're here now, we might as well have the breakfast. And it felt good. People were talking to us. People come and sat next to us. And we ate, and we laughed, and we sung some very odd songs. And some guy was stood at the front talking about this guy, Jesus. I mean, I'd heard about him. I figured he must be an all right guy. People go on about him quite a lot. But it wasn't for me. I wasn't interested in that. And then we broke out into little rooms and, you know, did little craft stuff and other bits and bobs. And it was great. And that was our introduction to church. But we didn't really know it. So we went home and we spoke about it quite a lot for the rest of the day, about different people we had met and how they treated us, and how we had been all of a sudden counted as people, not counted as numbers. We were all of a sudden human beings, not stats. And it was a beautiful time. And so next Sunday comes along, and we decided that this breakfast thing wasn't a bad show, and we're going to go again, because Sasha came home and said that the church will be meeting in the school again. And we thought, well, why not? It was a good time last time, and the food was good. So we walked back down to the school. We walked in through the door, and sure enough, we were met again, greeted with lovely smiles. It was so warm, so inviting. We walked into the school hall. There was no breakfast. And now all of a sudden I was like, oh no, what's going on? But instead, there was little tiny round tables dotted around with about 4 or 5 chairs around each one. And each one had a bread roll and a glass of wine sat on the table. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, these church folk, man, they start early, don't they? A little glass of wine and a little tipple before 10:30 in the morning can't be bad. And so we found our seat, and another guy come and sat with us, and he turned into to be a great friend over the years. And I went to pick up the wine, and he just put his hand on my arm and went, "Not yet." I was like, "Oh, I thought it was just open to all, and we can have." Now, obviously, I've been in the church game for a while now, so I know what communion is. I had no clue then. I had no clue about this strange bread and wine malarkey. I had no idea what any of it was. And so it was just another odd experience. But it was a beginning. It was a beginning of a journey. And we were going to that school, to church, for 12 weeks, every Sunday. No idea why. No idea like what we were meant to be doing when we got there. Just that it was good. And then the time came when they said they're going to go back to church. So it turned out that the church boiler had blown up, and that's why they were in the school. And which is probably why we joined. Because I don't know about you, but church is possibly the second most intimidating place to walk into. Especially the Anglican churches, the big steeples, the big towers, the big halls, the big doors, the big, it's just, they're terrifying. And the only thing that's more terrifying than walking into a church is walking into a gym. And so I don't think we would have gone. And that was the first lesson of understanding that we need to do things a little bit different sometimes. But we all met at the school. And we all got together and we all walked back to church. And the bells rang and the doors opened and we all walked in. And it was quite nice. There was a level of peace in the building that I hadn't really experienced before. And so our journey was afoot and we were on. But our lives were still bad. Our hearts were still poisoned. Our time, me and my partner, our relationship was toxic at best. But we were blagging it. We were getting away with it. Until we did a weekend away with the church. But we were broke, right? So it was called a weekend away at home. And we just basically went down a road to another church. And we got a guest talker in who was doing his thing. And as I said, I still didn't know who Jesus was personally. I haven't encountered him. I hadn't opened the door to let him in. But, everyone seemed very happy to talk about him, and everyone seemed very happy that we were there, and we were happy to be included in something. We were a part of a community that actually loved and supported us. But our hearts were not there. And halfway through this day, they did a prayer time where the guy at the front said, if anyone wants to be prayed for, stand up and people will come round and they will pray for you. So I kept my backside welded to the seat because I'm not really interested in that. But a hand lands on my shoulder as I'm getting my phone out to try and play Angry Birds. And this voice comes down in my ear and he said, I don't know what your name is, but I feel like I need to pray for you. I think I got something for you. I was like, oh, great. So he starts to pray. And at some point, and I don't know when, I've stood up. But as he's praying, and I still to this day don't really know what he was saying. But as he was praying, that's when the Holy Spirit turned up. I felt like there was a needle almost pushed into the back of my neck that connected straight to my heart. Because my heart was full of so much poison, so much hatred, so much just vile things. That God realized I needed a heart transplant. And that is what was coming. So the next thing I know, I'm a grown man in the middle of a hall with a whole load of other people and I'm crying like a toddler has been told he can't have a taxi bar. And I cannot stop crying. And I can feel all the poison, all the hatred, all the stuff in my heart that I've been holding on to is coming out. And I'm crying it out. And that point of it's almost like a needle sort of sensation being into my heart. And as that's emptying, so it's being pumped full of warmth and love. Now, I didn't know what was going on at that moment. And again, hindsight being 2020, I understood now that was the Holy Spirit cleansing my heart. I understand now that it was a time of when I needed to see my life, my wife, and everything we're doing differently. Because as I turned around, mid-flow of tears, mid-flow of heart pouring out, mid-flow of injection, I saw my partner, who, as I said, our relationship was toxic. And she was stood up, and she was receiving prayer. And through the blur of the tears, I got to see her as Jesus sees us. She was the most beautiful person on the planet. She was radiating pure light and pure love. And I knew at that moment that we are meant to be together with Jesus. And it changed everything. Absolutely everything. We had to spend the next, hour or two before words would come out. Disorientation, what's going on? How's anything happened in my life like this before? Who have I encountered? What is going on? All sorts of questions burning around both our heads. But things were on the move and things were changing. And at this point, our fourth child was now in a pram. And, we were not doing great jobs really as parents, but we were better than what we were. We were starting to be clean. We were starting to come off of our prescriptions. We were on our way. And that's what got me to the next stage. And I realized that I wanted to do something for people. I wanted to give back. And I started volunteering at our local cafe, church cafe. They taught me what it was to do Jesus in the community. The leaders there took me under their wing and taught us to do life. They opened their doors of their home to us. They come round our house. They helped us in so many ways. So when they moved on, the job became available. I went for it and started out as a 16-hour-a-week kitchen manager with no experience of kitchen work, no experience of cooking apart from myself and a deep fat fryer. But somehow, God just gave me every tool I needed, gave me a wife that would support me and hold me, and we went for it. Since then, we have just gone from strength to strength. God has been so active in our lives, it's incredible. I went from being a kitchen manager to a community leader in some way. It became a full-time role. It became more of an evangelistic role. It became a way of just talking to people where they are and just coming at exactly the same place where I was and saying, Jesus can do it. I'm walking, talking, living proof that Jesus will change your life. And we just grew and grew. And it got to the point where I needed a little bit more. And one of the senior leaders of the church saw potential in me to go and study. And obviously, as I said, I wasn't a school person, but this was different. Studying theology is totally different because if you love Jesus, then actually you're doing something you love. And so I did, and I went and studied, and and I loved it. I loved every minute of it, but it meant my career grew a little bit more. And I become more active at the front of church. I become more active in the community, being more brave, being more obvious about who I am and what I stand in. And my family started going the same way. We moved house to Keynsham and found a new community. again, just planting ourselves and declaring that we are in his kingdom and our house is part of that. And it is open to those that want to know more. And things have just progressed and progressed. I've seen my eldest somehow, throughout everything that we put her through, end up at university. I see my second child who, again, everything we put them through. She had just come back from South Africa after finishing college and doing an animal management course. Never flew in a plane in her life, and the first time she flies, she goes to South Africa. I now see my boy who's in college training to be a mechanic. The irony. And they are making it, and they are doing it, and they are deeply in their faith, and they are loving Jesus in that moment. And it's beautiful to watch. And my youngest, who's now 12, is bringing people along to church, doing what so many of us are told to do about invite people, bring people along, and we just don't do it. And she's doing it. She's showing us all up. And each and every one of our household has a deep love for what Jesus is, was, and will be. And it's so beautiful to be a part of that. And since then, I've managed to move on to work for a different charity now. I now work for a homeless charity that works with vulnerable people in addiction. It's a logical move. And I love doing it. And I've just been made pioneer minister in my home place where I live in Cambridgeshire. Again, it's just great being able to maneuver and do things in a different way and seeing people on the fringes find out who Jesus is and hear the gospel for the first time. It's transforming lives. So I suppose I just want to leave you with the notion that you can join church or, a group or something that love Jesus. You can join for many, many different reasons. Mine was just because someone welcomed us. But God will use you. He will transform you. If you allow him in your heart, if you allow that heart to open to him, you will see transformation. And it will be tough and it will be hard, but you will not be alone. Ever. You will always have a loving Father leaning on you, loving you and holding you. So I can just encourage you, go find a church, go find a Christian somewhere, and just go and find out who this Jesus guy is, because he will move mountains for you. Thank you so much.